Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Hope everything is going well. We are going to be working through one of the more fascinating aspects and stories that I have run across in my time reading and working through church history. And so, if you are tuned into this, let me check the audio. And there we are. We're doing good. So, as we are working through the history of the church, we come across multiple things. And again, I always remind that when we're working through church history, our main goal here is, again, not to find people that line up with us so that we can feel better about ourselves. No, the main focus that we have in church history is to look through the entire history that we have and pull from it wisdom and be able to establish for ourselves a wiser way in which to live, to think, to act, and to worship our God. Tonight we come across a story of a very fascinating individual and a group of people that surround her. In the retelling of the story of Perpetua, we have an announcement of how it is that martyrdom begins to be defined in the mind and the imagination of the church. There is perhaps no way to truly establish how influential the martyrs are in the early church. As the church continues to grow and its concept of itself, its concept of its role in the world, martyrs play such a pivotal role. You can actually even see as the imperial church comes into its being in the fourth century, its attitude towards martyrs and the value in which they have, connecting them even to the altar stone through relics, through even just the physical remains that they have, having spiritual force or energy or abilities. These things eventually lead up to things from the medieval area like transubstantiation and so forth. But here in the early church, martyrdom is still an unusual thing. I mean, we are finding ourselves this evening in the earliest of the 200s, 203 to be exact. And it's one of these things that while it has happened, I mean, we have spoken of Ignatius before, for instance, and we've spoken of Polycarp. We've spoken of even people like Peter and Paul who met their end in Rome as well. When you deal with martyrdom, it's really hard to gauge, even from a modern perspective, how significant these kind of stories are for the early church, but especially for the imperial and medieval church going forward. These become central stories to the experience of what it is to be a Christian. Everything that is the suffering of the monastic role and life really looks back to things like martyrs and the examples of these things. Now, when we're reading this, a word on this, because it's kind of hard to wrap our heads around this, but when these stories are being told, not so much in the earliest time, but as time goes on, when these stories are being told, you're going to run into a style of literature that doesn't really exist anymore, except in politics. And that is a style of literature called hagiography, which is let's say, the embellishment of the spiritual happenings around godly people. The embellishments of these things, or the exaggerations, in order to affect affect really those who would read their stories and be spurned on to good works or love or charity in some way. Even if embellishments needed to be done in order to accomplish that, it was seen as a laudable thing. This would be the area of hagiography. I say that happens in politics because, if you read anyone's assessment of why they should be elected to such a thing, usually what you're going to get back is some hagiographical recounting of their lives, how they over and above this and over and above that. So when you see these, you're going to see references to things like miracles or visions or things like this. Now, whether or not you believe those truly happened or they were just part of a hagiographical embellishment is kind of irrelevant. We are studying how these things affected the church. And so we're not really sitting here and going, hey, let's see if we can reconstruct if Perpetua actually had these visions or not, or if they were just dreams. I'm not here for that. I don't want to have that argument. I'm not interested in that argument. I am interested to hear from Perpetua's own mouth what she thinks and what she is experiencing, and then what the church thought in response. And so that kind of starts us in the first place. When I say from her own mouth, I mean it. She wrote a diary throughout this that we still have, and it was preserved. Most people think it was preserved through Tertullian. That is semi-likely, but I'm not going to make real issue about that. So it's not going to be one of those things I'm going to fight over. But at the end of the day, the reality is that we have it. And so that is a wonderful thing. Obviously, the story that describes her death after the diary, that is something that we that it definitely does not come from her own hand. That comes from someone else. But all of this, there's no reason to doubt the veracity of it, which is really just astounding. When you think about it. If you want the actual thing that I'm going to be kind of teaching from, I'm not going to put it up on the screen. Tonight I just have a slideshow for you, and I'm going to tell you the story of it because I'm not going to be reading it in its entirety, but I will be reading sections of it and quotes from it and things like that. So if you are one of those who wants a copy of this yourself, I have linked it in the description, and you're welcome to go pull it up. Again, like I typically do in this section of history, I use Roberts Donaldson's translation. That's something I've been familiar with for a long time, and so it kind of sits in my head. But it's a book called The Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas, and that's going to be our focus this evening. So thank you for joining us. Let's go ahead and dive in. Perpetua is a fascinating story for me, and I really want it to be a fascinating one for you as well. And so that's kind of, I'm going to try to sell you on her tonight, because she is one of the most fascinating examples of courage and faith in the middle of persecution. And persecution, there's a lot of Christians that have an idea that, basically from the time of the apostles all the way up to, good holy Constantine, that the church was persecuted by the Roman Empire nonstop throughout all that period of time. I've addressed this multiple times, but I'm going to address it again. That's not the case. Persecution broke out in one city here or in one city there, or on this outskirts, or when something was threatening, and then there was a lot of theorized danger from people who wouldn't toe the empire's line. But far and wide, persecution of Christians was not common. Persecution of Jews certainly was in the 70s when Jerusalem was taken out. And there was a really interesting reason for that, is Jews would fight back and had no issue about fighting back. Well, Christians largely were pacifists. And while the Roman Empire didn't value that belief and looked down on it, there really wasn't a reason to go hunt them down. That is, until you get into the midpoints of the 3rd century. But here, you notice in the year 203, we're not there yet. And so when you see persecution breaking out, you're going to see it in very highly localized areas. Tonight, we're going to be paying attention to one of those areas where it had come to town, if you will, and that is Carthage, on the north shore of the continent of Africa. It would be south of Rome, south of Italy and Sicily, there on the African coast. And so that is where we find ourselves this evening, is in Carthage. Carthage being a massive city that had its history in the Phoenician world, and now it is a center of a lot of trade in the Roman Empire. was not a small city by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't Rome, obviously. And at the center of all of this is the desire to see themselves honoring the emperor properly. And this is really what you're going to see as the third century wears on. If you really appreciate the way that the Roman Empire grows into itself, especially at this period of time, you're going to see that persecution tends to arise when the allegiance towards the empire is challenged in a person that is a Christian. Let me expand that just a little bit. A lot of civil wars are going to break out amongst the Roman Empire over the course of the next 100 or so years. And in the middle of all of that, who you are aligned with as a city is really, really important. And so when an emperor, for instance, has a birthday and everyone is to offer sacrifices and prayers towards the emperor to support him, have a flourishing and happy year, or what the case may be, when Christians refuse to do that, and they are found in that situation to do that, and they happen to be around somebody who has the ability to pull their life from them, and that person also wants to look good in Rome's eyes, when those stars align, persecution tends to break out. And it goes from, hey, we weren't hunting this down, to, hey, do you have any other friends who think like you? And this is kind of the period of history that we're working with now. Rome is not going house to house looking for scriptures at this point. That comes later. But here, this is a localized breakout of persecution. You can even see, and we'll talk about it a little bit tonight, that other Christians were able to come and visit them while they were in prison. And it's really fascinating to see what happens and how it happens. And so I really want to get into this with you this evening because some of my favorite stories from the early church, and when I say favorite, I don't mean that it's fun to read about, but it is challenging and encouraging to read about. How's that? First, a word on the text itself. The martyrdom or the passion of Saints Perpetua and Felicitas. Again, as I said, is historically argued to have been preserved and annotated by Tertullian. That is still conjecture. It's not proven, but it probably is the case. It would make sense. He was one of the Latin fathers. He was alive at the same time. He would have been privy to this, and he would have had the ability to do that. He really is the only one in the running that we have for theory on that. That we are aware of, but that doesn't mean that he absolutely did so. Either way, we have it; it's preserved, and then we have the tags on it as well to explain certain things. So, and the context, as we discussed, Rome in North Africa. Rome at this point is enormous, and it has grown past what it can manage, and so you get odd things usually on the outskirts of an empire, and this is kind of one of those places where the proconsuls truly want to be on the right side of Rome. This is within shot of Rome. This is not on the outskirts, but this strange stuff does happen on the outskirts. And as far as for Africa is concerned, Rome doesn't plunge very deep into Africa. You're talking north of the Sahara Desert. There's not a whole lot going on south of Tunisia at this point. And so, especially here in the 3rd century, you're trying to establish how this culture works. We're not really going to be dealing in that, but I just want you to be able to get your bearings there where we are. So, the year 203. Key figures. Vivia Perpetua, which from here on out I will just be referring to by the name that everyone knows her by, which is Perpetua, and her servant named Felicitas. Now, she has a servant, and Perpetua herself is a noblewoman, but she is 22 years old. Felicitas, by all estimates, maybe 19, maybe 20 years old. At the occurrence that we're going to be dealing here. And then there's several companions who are also Christians with them arrested. One who intentionally gets himself arrested. He's kind of a fascinating figure in this story as well. The text itself, most of it is Perpetua's own personal diary. But there are embellishments, as I have said, especially at the end, the closing out of the story and what exactly happened to her and to Felicitas and Satyrus and several others. So chapter 1, let's kind of go into her story, because I really want to focus more on the end of this story and what came from it. She was arrested. Now, this is an interesting thing as far as exactly how and why. The reality is she was married. She was a noble woman by birth and by marriage, and she was educated. Obviously, she had the ability to write, and she wrote very, very well. And her and her servant Felicitas both were brand new converts and were catechumens in the church in Carthage and immediately outside of it. And as a catechumen, that is someone who has come to faith in Christ, but has not yet learned enough theology to have worked their way or earned their way to prove themselves worthy of baptism. So in the early church, at least at this point here, there was a longer period of time where when you came to Christ as an adult, for instance, and then you desired to be baptized, you desired to take communion and all these things, but for the threat of persecution and for the threat of infiltration and so forth, there was a time of training. A time of training in the faith. This is where we get the word catechizing and catechumen. You are taught theology. You are taught what the faith is in order to be baptized. And until then, you are not even allowed to partake in communion yet. And so in all of this, we have new converts that are in the middle of a 2, maybe 3 year long process of being catechized and learning what it is that Christian theology is, who God is, what Christ has done, and all of these things. Even the nature of Scripture would be covered on this. That catechizing is something that in a lot of sections of the church has completely evaporated, and people, honestly just care very little about these things. But the early church didn't really have that comfort level to be able to say that they could just say, well, you have a profession of faith, get over here, get baptized, and then you can start taking communion. And again, in certain parts of the early church, when communion was celebrated, you got to remember, unbelievers were dismissed. You weren't even allowed to witness that. It was done without anyone else around. It was only those who had been baptized could partake in it, and unbelievers were not allowed to even see it or attend. And so there would be a section in the gathered assembly where unbelievers were dismissed, and only believers could stay by and be a part of what we would call communion or Eucharist. In all of this, we learn that Perpetua and Felicitas both are catechumens that are training towards baptism. Well, Perpetua is married, and she has just given birth to her baby son, and he's still nursing. And she actually, if you read this entire diary, you will see a lot of her references to her suffering really have to do with her missing her child. And the problems that a nursing mother has in the absence of her child, and all of those things. And so there's a lot of attaching suffering to both the emotional and the physical distress that comes from separation from her child. And as we'll see, she is able to actually have her son in prison with her for a bit as well. And anyway, we'll talk about that when we get there. So she was arrested, and along with several others, and Felicitas, excuse me. So some of these names that you're going to hear, Revocatus, not so much, Saturninus and Secundulus, and Perpetua and Satyrus. Now, Perpetua and Satyrus believe it or not, even with a name like the Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas, Perpetua and Satyrus tend to be more the main characters here in the way that this description is taken out, which is really interesting because Felicitas really does play a very, very minor role, but she is there the entire time. And Perpetua's care of her and support of her, even at the very end, is really second to none. And we will see that. Well, let's go into her story, right? She is from a pagan family. She is a Christian. Her father, who is another one of these secondary characters in the retelling here, her father is not. Her father is pagan and is currently taking care of her son. And he continually comes into this story and pressures her in multiple ways, whether when she's at trial or even to visit her in prison. And all of these pleas are made by him in various ways to pressure her to recant this faith, to just do this. It's not a big deal. You're just offering sacrifice for the emperor. You're just offering prayers for him and these types of things. And he keeps on trying to lessen what that is, and then raise up her awareness of what effects will happen if she truly is sent to die. And he will keep on reasoning with her. Think of my gray hairs. Think of your son growing up without his mother. Think of these things. And the pressure that sits on Perpetua is not lost to the text. This is not some, none of these earthly concerns matter to me. No, it's very, very real the way she writes about these things, and the pressure that she has from her father to turn on her faith, and the pressure that she has just as a mother looking at a nursing infant son and not able to give him what he needs. And she speaks a lot about her distress and her anxiety in the middle of all of this, but that she feels completely stymied because there is no way that she can renounce her faith in order to fulfill these very natural needs that are in the world that she lives in. So in the middle of all of this, it is hard, it is frustrating, and her brother, she had two brothers at this point. One of her brothers came to her and expressed to her that because she is suffering for the sake of Christ, perhaps you can ask for a vision to ask what's the outcome going to be. Because at this point they're arrested and they don't really know what the outcome is going to be. Maybe it's just some punishment for a while and then released. And again, you see this reality that martyrdom is not always an automatic in this. Sometimes the proconsul just wanted to keep face and until somebody leaves town, and then they set you free and no big deal, this kind of stuff. And so they were wanting to, her brother suggested maybe since you are suffering for Christ, maybe he can offer you a vision about what the future brings. And perhaps that'll happen. Well, in her retelling, one night she does have a vision of the ladder and the dragon, which you can read for yourself. It's at the end of chapter 1, paragraph 3. It's not terribly long. If you're interested into her exact visions, I'm not going to go into detail about her visions. You're welcome to do so. But in short, it is a metaphor she sees as her spiritual journey, and this dragon that's at the foot of the ladder that is trying to kill her shows her the nature of her impending martyrdom, expressing to her that in the middle of all of this, that it's not going to be one of these things where you're arrested for a while and then set free. And so she goes forward as far as she is writing this essentially autobiography. It's all in the first person. And she says at this point, I'm going forward expecting that now this is going to be a passion, a martyrdom. She actually finishes off that description there of that by saying, at that point we ceased to have any hope of this in this world. That there is no hope that she is going to be reunited with her son in any permanency, or her brother, her mother, even her father, that these relationships are passing away, and that there is no hope for her in this world, and that her hope needs to turn fully and completely towards heaven. Well, in chapter 2, we see the outcome of that vision. In chapter 2, we start to realize that the pressure that's put on her by her father is not going to in any way let up. He continues to come and visit her and begs her. This makes it very, very difficult for her, and she makes it really clear how difficult this is for her. And she expresses that her father had come into her worn out with anxiety. He came up to me, she says, that he might cast me down, saying, "Have pity, my daughter, on my gray hairs. Have pity on your father, if I am worthy to be called a father by you. If with these hands I have brought you up to this flower of your age, if I have preferred you to all your brothers, do not deliver me up to the scorn of men. Have regard to your brothers. Have regard to your mother and your aunt. Have regard to your son, who will not be able to live after you. Lay aside your courage," her dad is telling her, "and do not bring us all to destruction. For none of us will speak in freedom if you should suffer anything. These things," she says, "said my father, in his affection, kissing my hands and throwing himself at my feet. And with tears he called me not daughter, but lady. And I grieved over the gray hairs of my father, that he alone of all my family would not rejoice over my passion. And I comforted him, saying, on that scaffold, whatever God wills shall happen. For know that we are not placed in our own power, but in that of God. And he departed from me in sorrow." Again, as she retells the happenings of what is going on with all of this, we start to learn that not only is her father frustrated at this point and sad, and understandably so, he is not a Christian, but we also learn from Perpetua's just side mentioning of this that the rest of her family is. Her father is still pagan, but her mother and her brothers are rejoicing that she's going to experience martyrdom. Now, that may seem a strange thing for us to look at from any culture that we tend to come at from in the West, because we don't usually look at suffering as a positive thing, and we certainly wouldn't look at martyrdom or being put to death as a positive thing. We'd almost look at it as if it is given to us. I suppose that's a necessary evil, but we don't look at suffering this way. And this is one of the things I really want us to pick up from Perpetua's retelling of these things. They looked at suffering very much like the apostles looked at it. You hear in the book of Acts when they are beaten for preaching in the name of Jesus, after they are beaten, they run out jumping and leaping and rejoicing for being counted worthy to suffer for Christ's name. I can't think of a recent sermon I've heard in the West that went viral and popular because it argued for how gracious it would be for God to have us suffer. We just don't think like that. She goes on to tell the story. She says, "Another day while we were at dinner, we were suddenly taken away to be heard, and we arrived at the town hall. At once the rumor spread throughout the neighborhood of the public place, and an immense number of people were gathered together. We mount the platform, and the rest were interrogated." Here she's speaking of the other Christians that were with her. "The rest were interrogated, and they confessed." They confessed Christ, meaning. "Then they came to me, and my father immediately appeared with my boy." Now she's standing trial right now in front of the procurator, and her father jumps out of the crowd with her baby boy. And she says, "He withdrew me from the step and said in a supplicating tone, 'Have pity on your baby.' And Hilarianus, the procurator," basically the one in charge right now, "who had just received the power of life and death in the place of the proconsul who was before him, who had died, said, quote, 'Spare the gray hairs of your father and spare the infancy of your boy. Offer sacrifice for the well-being of the emperors.'" Perpetua responds, she says, "I replied, 'I will not do so.' Hilarianus said, 'Are you a Christian?' And I replied, 'I am indeed a Christian.'" She recounts, she says, "As my father stood there to cast me down from the faith, he was ordered by Hilarianus to be thrown down, and he was beaten with rods. And my father's misfortune grieved me as if I myself had been beaten. I so grieved for his wretched old age." Now, stop for just a second there. This kind of shows you the way that things like torture and trying to influence an outcome work in the minds of those who are holding at trial those who are being persecuted as Christians. There is no limit to what they won't go to attempt to have something put under control. Notice this is not, they're not beating another Christian. Her father is trying to convince her with the exact same words that the procurator is trying to convince her of. They are just using anything to get them to fold on this, which is fascinating because at the end of this, it is just as well for a ruler like this to put somebody to death that is wrong than it is to get them to recant Christianity. And so they beat her father in front of her, trying to get her to and sway her to recant these things. And she says, I was so grieved for his wretched old age. The procurator then delivers judgments on all of us and condemns us all to the wild beast. And we went down cheerfully to the dungeon. Then, because my child had been used to receive suck from me and to stay with me in the prison, I sent Pomponius, the deacon, to my father to ask for the infant, but my father would not give it to him. And even as God willed it, the child no longer desired the breast, nor was I uneasy anymore, lest I should be tormented further. So in all of this, we start to see the frustration with how to handle an oncoming martyrdom. How does this affect family? How does this affect the church's view of the value of these things? Even for those who are in the family of such a person, seeing this as a positive thing that is going to happen in their life, or seeing this as a gift. You can even see from those who were being challenged to this, they are interacting with this, and then they are returning cheerfully back to the dungeon right after they were condemned to be torn apart by wild beasts. That is certainly a world that we don't live in anymore. May again some year, but not right this point. Well, later on, she receives another vision. A brother of hers who had died at 7 years old. And she gives a pretty miserable description of her young brother's death at 7 years of age, whose face had been eroded away from what she calls cancer, and he was unable to drink or breathe properly or anything like this. And she prays for him and all of these things, and in her vision he goes from suffering and torment to paradise and comfort, and his face now just has a scar on it, and he is able to breathe and eat and drink, healed and normal and happy. It's a rough section to read. I'm not going to include it in this evening, but if you want to, you're welcome to do so. It's the last half of chapter 2. Again, all of these pressures are on her. All of these pressures to fold. All she has to do is revoke. And then she is able to walk free. She's able to have her son back. Her brother, obviously, is, according to her vision, in paradise now. Her father will be happy, and she'll be with her family and all these types of things. And her father wouldn't be beaten anymore. And she wouldn't have all of these problems with the procurator that's in charge of the town in which she lives. All of these pressures are coming on her, and yet, as they return back to their prison cell, they go back cheerfully, having received a sentence for death, and continue on that way. Well, again, there are multiple things. The first aspects of the prison are really difficult time in prison. This is not a simple place to be, but once we get about halfway through the story, the assistant overseer of the prison, a guy named Pudens, who will actually be there at the very end, was able to give them more freedoms and kinder accommodations, even providing for more visitors. He actually held them in high regard, it seems, and it seems the subtext of the story perhaps even became a Christian secretly at this point. Which is just a really interesting subpoint or subplot going on in the middle of all this. The visions here start to take on a new shape and a new world, because now, knowing that they are going to be thrown to the beasts, now the visions start kind of flooding into how this is going to go about, not even just telling the exact nature of these things, but what kind of support there is for the Christian going through this. And that's really what I want to take from this, especially for the first one. The first one is the vision of Pomponius the deacon, who in this vision leads her out into the amphitheater, where there's all of the types of animals that would take them apart: leopards and bears and boar and all these types of things. And one of the most important things there is this understanding of what is promised there, that do not fear, I'm with you and I am laboring with you. This idea that there's not you just by yourself there in the arena. It is not that you are there suffering on your own. Not only are you there in the middle of it with those who you are with, but you are there with a whole cloud of witnesses. You are there with the Lord. You are there with other martyrs who have gone on before you. They are all giving you strength to endure what's about to happen to you. It is a fascinating vision. The second vision is that is called the vision of the Egyptian, which she refers to here, that it's someone that needs to be defeated. She sees in this vision of the Egyptian that is indicative of the devil himself, and that she is going to be in a fight for her soul in order to do this. And the way that she fights it is to take the punishment without fighting back, which is a really interesting way to address this. Chapter 3 is one of the shorter chapters, but it does talk about all of these things and kind of introduce us to Pudens, who becomes an important part there at the end there. In chapter 4, we continue on with the story. This is where Satyrus, the other person that was abducted with them, and what I'm going to say is kind of the second main character of all of this, he has his own vision here. And it is a really extended description about heaven and the heavenly reward versus the earthly side of suffering. Satyrus's vision. Now, this is really interesting, because if you want to reconstruct the eschatology of the early church, or if you want to reconstruct the even the study of heaven in the early church, this is just such a rich passage. When Satyrus retells his vision to her, to Perpetua, she actually records it down and talks about that in the heavenly realm, martyrs are held in high regard. There's descriptions of the heavenly hosts. There's descriptions of the nature of heaven, and what we are to expect on the other side. He talks to other martyrs that had been martyred in other places that they had known personally and even from a distance. Those who had been burned at the stake, those who had suffered in the same place as them, and so forth. It is an interesting thing, because it really speaks to the role that the reputation of martyrs had in church life, and the expectation that a martyr could have upon faithfully seeing through their suffering. Martyrdom was, in the early church, far and wide, written about as a gift not to be sought, a gift not to be stolen by any means. And don't be a intentional crazy person to be martyred, but if martyrdom is gifted to you, you should accept it joyfully. That was really the concept here. The eschatological hope, the kind of hope of what is to be seen or what is to be experienced by the martyr after death, really plays a role here. Now, it's even more important. I put here, even on the screen, the role of martyrs in church life. Perpetua in this has her own vision of reconciling a bishop and a presbyter in the middle of all this. This responsibility to reconcile a disagreement that was happening between a metropolitan bishop and a local presbyter, basically what we would call a bishop and a pastor, or a one who would be a level above, or in administration of things, a level above a pastor. So there was a disagreement between them, and they come to Perpetua to solve the discrepancy between them. And she doesn't see herself as fit for that role. She doesn't. She sees herself as following them, not as them following her. And so we start to see this kind of shift in the attitude of the early church towards martyrs as those to which we should pay our attention, or even to our devotion, rather than somebody simply because of their office. Perpetua is a 22-year-old young woman that's a mother. Optatus and Aspasius are a bishop and a presbyter. They are ordained, they are trained, they continue these. Perpetua is just a catechumen, and yet they are being seen as having their disagreements solved by Perpetua. It's just an interesting view right into their expectation for the value of the input of martyrs, specifically, even of those who are about to go face martyrdom. There's somebody to listen to. There's somebody to look up to, and you can start to see attitudes shifting towards almost a quasi heavenly person in the as the church continues down this road. Richard responds that she joyously awoke from this, quite fascinating to see. In chapter 5, we see that one of her companions there, one of the Christians, a man named Secundulus, dies next to them in prison. Felicitas, she's 19, 20 years old, somewhere around there. And when she was arrested, she was about 7 or 8 months pregnant. And at this point, she has come up to about 8 months pregnant. But she is very nervous because, according to Roman rule, you cannot put to the arena somebody who is pregnant. They counted the baby to have value on a level, and not to be worthy of being destroyed along with its mother, and so she would have to wait until she gave birth. Well, Felicitas, Perpetua tells us, is absolutely overcome with grief about this because she is pregnant. She's not upset that she's pregnant. She is upset that her pregnancy might miss her out on being a martyr with all of them, that she would have to just wait to suffer some other kind of death with a group of criminals later on. And if she was to die, she says that she wants to do it with her brothers and sisters here. She does not want to do all this. And so they actually all came together and prayed for her for 3 days, for the 3 days before their sentence was to be carried out, that she would give birth. Well, she does. She gives birth to a girl. She goes from no labor to a bunch of labor all at once, and gives birth to a girl that is adopted by another Christian woman in town. Again, this shows you not all Christians were being sent to this. This is not even a handful of people that are enduring this at this point. This is not widespread. This is specific, and specifically dealing with something, direct. Because there is no other Christian woman that's able to come in and take the newborn baby girl away from Felicitas. Well, the day before the arena comes up, they are given the right to a final meal, their last meal, and so they design it to essentially be a form of communion. Not communion in some official sense, but the last supper that they have together. The reality is that when they were just about to be arrested, they knew that they would be arrested when they were just about to go to trial. Their bishop went ahead and baptized them both Perpetua and Felicitas, and so they were able to take part in all of this. When they came to this last meal, one of the things that is said, especially as you will begin to realize that there's some in their group that have much more of a challenging tone about them. Perpetua is almost put as more reserved, but with resolve. Felicitas is again along the same lines as Perpetua, and but they speak of the reality that no matter how severe it is of what they're going through, that they are going through it together. And Felicitas is absolutely relieved that she was able to give birth to her daughter, and that she is going to be raised by another Christian woman, and that Felicitas is going to be able to join them in martyrdom there in the arena on the next day. Their unity in the midst of this persecution, and one of the things they actually say to the guards and those who are viewing all of this is to remember their faces. And one of the testimonies that we get from the person who gathered this writing after the fact is that many who were there to witness all of this ended up as Christians after witnessing these sufferings by them, and the unity and clarity with which they saw all of this. Well, comes the day. They're led forth from the prison to the Carthage amphitheater, and they are entering to the amphitheater singing psalms, and it says singing psalms with joy. In the middle of all of this, they each of them have a certain way of interacting with what's going on, and certain expectations with how it will go down. Satyrus is particularly outspoken in the middle of all of this, and actually calls out to Hilarianus, the proconsul who is overseeing all of this. When he enters in, he says, you think that you have the right and the ability to judge us, but God will judge you for what you are doing here. Set loose into the arena with them is a leopard, a bear, a boar, and a bull. And in all of these undertakings, those are just the ones that are mentioned. Obviously, here we're in the section not written by Perpetua, because she wasn't able to write about this. Sorry, some of this is kind of hard to talk through here. Satyrus had received a bit of a vision that he was going to be put to death by a leopard, and he puts his focus on that to be able to happen. But there were several instances where the animals refused to come and actually attack Perpetua or Felicitas, and a bull is actually set loose on them. And this bull comes and attacks them and tramples them and breaks many of the bones in their bodies. And the way that this is gone on is several of them are being attacked all over. Multiples of them have died. There's only a couple of them that remain after just a few minutes. And then the animals kind of leave them alone. Satyrus is given to the understanding that a leopard would destroy him with a single bite, and he actually made up his mind to do so and ran towards the leopard to have it take him down. Perpetua is able to get somewhat to her feet, and in the way that the accounting is that her response to a lot of this is almost unaware of any sufferings. This is an interesting way that it's written about, because she is accounted to say that in all of this there is no suffering that she herself is just experiencing. In fact, she doesn't even realize that she's been injured significantly and mortally by the bull, until she is able to look down and realize much of the damage that is done to her, and to Felicitas and to others that are around her. She's able to gather herself up and cover herself up in the best way that she can, and stand up and help Felicitas up to her feet as much as she can, Felicitas had been crushed by the bull at this point, and her final words that are recorded there, she calls out to the Christians that are enduring this at this moment, and she says to all of them to stand fast in the faith and love one another, all of you, and be not offended at my sufferings. Satyrus at this point throws himself towards the leopard. Nearby is the soldier Pudens, I told you, who would come here up at the beginning, or at the ending. And Satyrus runs towards him where one of the leopards are, and specifically goes and speaks to Pudens directly. And we have those words recorded for us in the text as well, where he says, "Farewell, and be mindful of my faith, and let not these things disturb, but confirm you." And with that, he threw himself at the leopard, who, it says, had, with a single bite, released enough blood to baptize him again. And it is a fascinating response to how all of these things were going on, and the roar of the crowds and the desire to see these things carried out. There was a response from the crowd at the end of this where Perpetua had called out her final words, and the crowd had said it's enough at this point. It was obvious we were dealing with a small framed little woman and another woman with her who had just obviously just given birth with Felicitas, and it seemed to max out some of the crowd's desire to see any more of this. And so it was called for the gladiators to come up and to dispatch them entirely. What we have is the account that Perpetua, when that came to it, when the gladiator came up to her, she grabbed his hand and forced it towards her throat with sword in hand, and basically requested to be the first one to go. And they were all beheaded. The person who chronicles this and passes it down to us includes in his own ending for this. And after telling the story of their death, and then including, and of course, all of her diary, the person who's writing this writes, "O most brave and blessed martyrs, O truly called and chosen unto the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ, whom whoever magnifies and honors and adores assuredly ought to read these examples for the edification of the church, not less than the ancient ones, so that new virtues also may testify that one and the same Holy Spirit is always operating even until now, and God the Father omnipotent and his Son Jesus Christ our Lord, whose is the glory and infinite power forever and ever. Amen." And there, I would say, is the importance of us learning stories like this and reading them. Because they are meant to be examples, and they are meant for our edification. We are the church for which these things were written. And they should edify us. They should encourage us. Because while we may not live in a time of great persecution, or maybe you do in whatever country you're in, or maybe you're hearing this at a time when persecution is broken out, let this story be of encouragement to you and of edification to you. Because whatever pain is for a moment, there is indeed a fire that burns for eternity that we look to avoid. I would encourage you to think more on, and to even read the story of Perpetua and Felicitas and the courage and faith from the early church during a time where their culture was turning against them quickly, and persecution starts breaking out in spurts and sputters before it comes throughout the rest of the Roman world in a massive empire-wide hunt. And we're about 50 years removed from that in this story this evening, but it's coming. And I would encourage any of us to consistently be edified by these marvelous examples of brothers and sisters from an era gone by. Lord's blessings to you all. Thank you for your attention and your time. And I would encourage you to go take the link that is in the description of this video or of this podcast and go read the whole story for yourself. I think you'll be encouraged and you'll be